Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining me. Today we're going to look into Spring 23 release features. I'm going to start with flow features, and then we're going to look into general platform enhancements as well. If you're not familiar with release notes, this is a one-place documentation that you can come to get all the greatest news about Salesforce release. This is a great place to know all the future enhancements, so you can start to use those enhancements to really improve your productivity and development. This is also categorized by different clouds and different industries that you're interested in. For example, if you're using Experience Cloud, you may want to check out Experience Cloud and look at all the improved features that's coming up. It's also a great place to know about deprecation, any feature activation that you need to do, regardless of your role in the Salesforce ecosystem. This is a great place to come to and get the latest information. So I highly recommend it for everyone. Now let's jump into our favorite flow features. So the first feature I will call out here is for all the documentation nerds, including myself. So if you're into documenting everything that you're doing, which I highly recommend you do, always add descriptions for all the elements within the flow. So before you actually have to click on it to look at the description, I just put test here, but now you can just hover over it. So this should give you extra motivation to really document your flow. This not only helps yourself if you're looking at a complex flow after a few months or years, it will also help your fellow admins and developers or anybody who takes your work after you leave. Okay, so next features are around the screen. So I'm just gonna open up one of the screen, and I wanna bring your attention to the choice lookup. This is really cool feature if you have a long drop down of list or pick list values. So imagine you have 100 pick list values that you are constantly having your users scroll through them. It's a really good idea to replace that with choice lookup. So let me show you how that works first. As I clicked on this, I can see all the different options available to me because this is currently filtered on the account name. It can be anything for your use case, but the idea here is that the users will start to type out certain words, and then that would just bring up the actual drop down and they can just select on it. It's a really good use case, especially if you're showing a lot of records and the users kind of already know what they want, so they can just type it out instead of having to click through or scroll through everything. It's also searches for the middle, so it doesn't have to the beginning. So if I type America, I'm already seeing this record. So it searches throughout that name. So how do you set that up is you just use the choice lookup component and you can drag and drop. And the feature is very similar to the pick list if you're already familiar with that. So you'd have to configure the choice. So you can say new choice resource, choose a resource type. Record choice set made the most sense to me. You can pick your object and add filters here. You can also set the maximum number of choices. I usually don't recommend this because that might cause more confusion, especially if you already have filters. And then you can also store the field that they selected. So let's say if you are showing the account names, but you're also interested in storing, let's say, the billing state or the country for that account that they selected, to potentially use it in the next screen or somewhere else in the flow, you can also do that. So I've already done that here. So I'm going to delete that out. But basically, you can have billing country saved in a different variable, which I'll show you in a second. Next enhancement is around dynamic forms for flow. If you're not already using fields, I highly recommend you start doing this instead of using components and dragging and dropping different fields. So in the past, if you have to create an input form, let's say you want to just have contact information typed in for the user, you would actually drag and drop one by one. But now you can use fields, but that's not new. The new thing is now you can actually have lookup field. So this was already all available, but now you have account ID. For example, I'm using a var contact record variable, so I'm able to see all the contact fields here. So I can easily drag and drop pretty easily, but now we can also use a lookup field, which is new, that didn't exist until now. So that's pretty awesome that Salesforce is adding more functionality to this dynamic form. So highly recommend starting to use it if you haven't already. They have also provided a multi-select pick list, which will mimic the same functionality as the standard page. So that's also more enhancement around this dynamic form. Next feature I want to talk about is the data table. So nothing really changed in data table functionality per se, but now you can see the UI right here. So as you're configuring the columns, let's say if I add a new column here, I can see the changes as I'm making it on the left side. So before it would just show me like a component, no preview available, but now I can see the preview as I'm working on it, which is also nice to see how many columns can fit in this real state. So that's also really good. Another feature I want to highlight in the flow screens is reactive flow screens or reactive components within the screen. What that means is you can now have multiple components in the screen react to each other. So if you change certain things in one screen or one component, it would refresh in the same screen. Before, to do that, you would have to put the component in a different screen and hit next, then it will get changed. Here's an example. So I have this input element. This is from in the flow. So if I go back to the flow, this is just the text input. And right here, I have a Lightning Web component. So I'll just show you as I'm typing test here. It's actually changing right there. So this is dynamically being able to change. That is awesome. What I'm really looking to do here is being able to show the results as I'm typing in this input. That would be really awesome. I haven't figured that out yet, but I know it's possible. So please let me know in the comments if you have. And if I do, I'll definitely make a video on that. And moving on to the next feature, I'll exit out of this edit screen. And the next feature is around HTTP callout. So now you can make HTTP callout right from the flow. What do I mean by that? So if I click new action, I will now see an option for create HTTP callout beta. So just click on that. And quick things to note about this, if you have never used external services to make callout, there is a trailhead I can link you to, and I'm going to use an example from that trailhead. But you need to have a name credential set up as well as remote site services added. So you need to have a remote site service added to that website as well as a name credential set up. In this case, my name credential is pretty simple. It's really anonymous and no authentication. But in ideal scenario, you'll have some sort of credential to access that external service. So I already created something called animals. This is something that Trailhead provides. If you just go to this website /animals, you will be able to see that it will return these results in JSON. And we'll use that JSON in a second. So let's say I wanted to call this animals service and hit next. Okay, didn't like that. Next. So here we create the HTTP callout. Let's call it get animal services because I'm going to select get method. And URL path here, I'm going to enter animals because that's my URL for this website. Think of it similar to when you're making a call out to, let's say, a Google map and you are entering certain information or text or something, and then it returns you a result. So it's something similar to that. You have to enter this path. This is like the main URL. And then you can add query parameters. This is like adding special information for that. Let's say you wanted to get a particular animal back, then you would enter more queries parameters. We'll skip that. And then here you have to provide a response. So anytime you're working with a third-party website or any API, they will have some sort of JSON response that you can provide. In this case, I'm just going to copy this because that's my expected response. Paste it here, review this. So this is actually going to create the data structure for you directly. Hit done. And that's it for this step. I'm just going to change the name here. So it was not letting me save because I already had that existing service. So once you create the service, you can actually access that in external services. So if I go to my external services under setting, I should see all of those created. Okay, so that was the first step. Now, once I have the external service created, I want to use that in the flow. So I'm just going to call it get animals for this flow. I'm just going to call it 1 because I'm pretty sure I have it already. After that, you either use advanced option to manually assign the variable. So this is basically what you're getting back from that API. You'll get a response code, either 200 or 400. So depending on your response code, you may get a success or an error message back. So you can assign it manually, but you can also let the system assign it for you and hit done. So once you hit done, what I have done here is outputted that value. So what I'm doing here is I'm just putting get animals.response code just to show you the value. If it's 200, that's a good thing. That means my response is successful. And this is for the other pick list where I selected the billing country. Let me just show all of that quickly. So we already talked about that. I'm just going to select this account because I know that account has country as USA. This is just to skip the validation. I'm not really doing much there, but you could create a contact right from here. Hit next. So here I can see the selected state country was USA, and the response I got was 200. And you can see in the outputs, I'm also getting the JSON back. So if I wanted, I could also print that out in the screen. Another feature I want to call out that I have not seen in the Salesforce release notes, but I did see on official salesforce.com, is that flow iteration limit is removed. If you have been using Flow for a while, and if you know that the looping over 2000 elements actually causes error in Flow, and there are so many workarounds that, and Salesforce is potentially finally removing that limit, which I'm super excited about. So those were some of the Flow enhancements I want to discuss. Let's move on to other platform enhancements. So for over the last 2-3 years, Salesforce has been pushing permission sets over profiles. And one of the challenges with permission sets was whenever you're creating a field, you can't add it to permission sets like you could do that in profiles. So with this release, they are releasing something where you can now go to any fields and set up the field level security right from the object manager. So if I go to field level security, I can actually set whether it's read access, edit access right here, which is pretty awesome. So you don't have to go to permission sets to check those boxes. You can do it directly as you're creating the field. You do have to enable that. So you should go to user management settings if you can find that option, and then enable field level security for permission sets during field creation. So you have to enable that in order to see that option. But that's pretty awesome that we are now getting that feature. So that should definitely encourage a lot of us to start using permission sets. Another feature I read about in the release notes is you can apply and automate mass access with user access policy. I cannot try that because you have to contact with account executive for your org. So one of the use cases that they mentioned is if you wanted to mass assign profile permissions to permission sets or a bunch of users, you can do that using something called user access policy. That is completely brand new. I have not tried that out. So definitely connect with your account executive if you want to hear more about that. I will link that as well in the description about the release notes. Next thing is around the dynamic forms. So we talked about the flow dynamic forms, but Salesforce also has dynamic forms for objects. Until now, it's only available for custom objects. They're also called dynamic pages. What that allows you to do is control your fields right from Lightning page instead of going to page layouts and record pages 2 different times. So now they started to add it to standard objects as well, starting with case and lead object. So if I go to my case object, edit here, and when you go to details, you will see that you can now upgrade your case record pages to dynamic forms. Now, dynamic forms are super powerful because you can add or remove fields from here directly instead of having to go to page layout. You can also add filters. You can make it read only, add filter. So let's say if you don't want to show certain fields based on certain other values in the same field, or maybe based on the permission of the user, you can do all of that in dynamic pages. But don't go too crazy with the filters. What I've noticed is the more filters you add, the slower your page gets. So definitely be conscious of that as well. Next feature worth calling out as we are in the Lightning page is also the dynamic related list. So this is not a new feature. This was already out, I think, last release. If you are not familiar or if you have not started using this, highly recommend checking this out because this really lets you add different related lists with filters. So let's say if you had different types of contacts related to the same case or contacts related to account, but if you want to show them differently, you want to show prospect contacts and then true customer contacts in 2 different buckets, you could do that by using filter. And all you need is some sort of pick list or something that can help you filter. Limitation before was that it would only show you 30 records maximum, which I think is more than enough. But if you have more than that for some reason, even after using the filter, then now you can have a link to see all records at once. So there will be view more option. One general call out is, as you're designing these lightning pages, even though you can add a lot of components, a lot of bells and whistles, you definitely have to keep the end user in mind. They are not Salesforce experts, so you want to show the information that makes the most sense and in most consumable size. So you don't want to have a lot of components so that the user cannot even pay attention to the more important things. So definitely keep the design principles in mind as you're building the lightning pages. Check out the UX designer and strategy designer certifications as well. I think those are really great trail mixes to go through, even if you're a Salesforce admin, even if you don't consider yourself as a designer. I think if you're building any lightning pages or custom components on Salesforce, we all play a part in being that designer. The last feature that I want to show today is this sharing hierarchy action. This is a standard action that you can add on your page. This lets you see who has access to records and why. And if you have restriction rules enabled, it will also show you why that user is not seeing certain things based on restriction rules. So this is a really great place to solve some of the mysteries. I know that sharing can become mysterious sometimes, especially if you have very custom sharing and groups and public settings, all that stuff. A good place to come to would be the sharing hierarchy to see if the users have access to the record and why do they have access to the records. Like I already mentioned, definitely check out other enhancements. This is not all the enhancements. There are a lot more to go through. So if you're really interested, I highly recommend checking this out. Please let me know if you have any questions or if you want me to cover any topics in more detail. Also, let me know what are your favorite features and if I missed something that you want to call out in the comments as well. Thank you so much for watching.